even though we're into Advent, and it's funny. I usually this time of year I'm talking about the themes of Christmas and of Advent, but with certainly everything that's been going on in my life and Laura's life, and with the enormity of the transitions that have been happening in our nation and in the world, I just kind of felt like it was more important to stay on track with helping us to maybe get some tools or some understanding of the process of transition. So we are back in finding yourself in transition. And this week we are taking a look at wandering in the wilderness, which if you've been following in the book, you know that what Bob does is he kind of gives us a piece of the theory and some of the higher level metaphysics, and then he goes back and relates it to the story of the Israelites and coming out of Egypt and that transition from being slaves in Egypt to moving into the promised land. And in this particular chapter, he is taking a very deep look at the time that the Israelites spend wandering in the wilderness. And so each of these quotes that I'm going to have on these slides, these all come directly from finding yourself in transition. And this is, and most of them are actually, in this case, this Sunday, are various biblical quotes that he's used to illustrate the process of being in the void, of wandering in the wilderness. So, and this is from Exodus chapter 14. Having escaped from Pharaoh, the Israelites are now confronted with life in the wilderness, with little in the way of provisions or experience. Their most important resource was Moses's access to the Lord. This entire story is like one big metaphysical tale. I know it's an important piece of history for a lot of our Jewish friends, and many of them, as many of our Christian friends do, take this stuff pretty literally. But the metaphysics of this, and kind of the archetypal figures in it, they ring so loudly that it's impossible to ignore that part of this, and the way that certain themes within the story get repeated over and over again, so that even if you don't know that you're hearing a story with a message, you hear the message. And one of these pieces of this is Moses and Moses's access to God. And it is absolutely, it's a very simple message. It's like, it's amazing what we can get through when we remember we have access to spirit, when we remember that we are plugged into God. And it's interesting, and I'll probably talk about this maybe a little bit more later, depending on how much time we have. But Moses, this person who was kind of the conduit to God, Moses, the name Moses means to draw out. And of course, it's kind of representative of what he did with the Israelites. He literally drew them out of Egypt. But when we look metaphysically at a story, the characters within that story generally represent thoughts held in human consciousness. And when we talk about the Israelites as slaves in Egypt, what we take a look at is an older human consciousness, one that is slave to the carnal mind, the raw desires and things. It's almost like the why not get a little political? It's almost like the way that many people in our society today are slaves to materialism, rather than taking a look at things from maybe a little higher perspective, and realizing that money and stuff is not what it's all about. Okay, so within that population, all right, within the population of the Israelites, there's this dude Moses, who he's kind of the spark that draws them out of that. And that's a lot like, those of us who get stuck in some form of lower consciousness. Like I knew for a long time, when I was actively in my addiction, I knew, right? I knew there was something wrong with me. And I it's like I wasn't quite ready to take the first step into the unknown, because what was known for me was self-medicating, right? I didn't know how to handle that life, but there was a part of me that it was kind of saying, Charles, you're going to need to do this at some point. Well, then things happened, and I was kind of forced to take the step. But there are a lot of people that don't make it. And I think one of the main reasons I made it was because I was somehow able to hang on to my inner Moses, that little piece of me that knew that there was something better somewhere else in consciousness, that there was some other way, even if I didn't know quite how to get there, if I could just do what felt like the next right thing to do, right? And this one's tough. This next piece that, and I have titled this slide, "You Are Not Alone." And what Bob says is, in the ending stage, we are preoccupied with the past. Eventually, the past is no longer our primary focus, and we move to the next process, the void. And here we may feel lost and vulnerable. However, we have direct access to the Lord of our being, the I am. And when we talk about that phrase, I am, it comes from the translation of when Moses is having problems with the Israelites along the way. People are grumbling, and they keep, telling them, hey, you're not a real good boss. You're not doing this right. You don't know what you're doing. We should never have left, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, he's like, okay, listen, you need to tell me who you are, God, so that I can go back and say, this guy is the guy. He's the one that told me. And what the character of God in the story tells him is, you can tell them, I am that I am. That's the literal translation of, what's in the original scripture. I am that I am. And what that does is it really places the point of spirit in consciousness as that conscious mind. And I've talked before, and I'll probably talk again, about how powerful the words I am are. And maybe some of it's connected to the idea that it's the seat of consciousness. And it may very well be that what God is the collective consciousness of all conscious beings. That's one way of looking at it. I tend to think that it's even bigger than that, but we all have our own opinions. But we have direct access to that I am. The minute we go within and we stop getting caught in our current thoughts, and this is what meditation is all about, right? We try not to think the thoughts so much as observe the thoughts being thought. That observer of the thought, not the thinker of the thought, but the observer of the thought, the I am. That sense of consciousness is where we have that, what Bob says is the direct access to the Lord of our being. It is in the experience of that. So then as time goes on, what we see is that the Israelites encounter various difficulties. And as he points out here, the Israelites encounter water that is not fit to drink. In fact, the first problem was, it wasn't that they encountered the water, it was they ran out of water, right? So they're out there in the desert, desperately need water, and they find some water, but it's no good, it's bitter. So the Israelites encounter water that is not fit to drink until the Lord intervenes with a miracle. The Lord then makes a covenant with the Israelites. And I've got my, when I think of let's make a deal, I think of Monty Hall. That's, I'm showing my age here. But, God makes them a deal. And this is repeated several times throughout the story, that something happens, the Israelites start murmuring, and then, God steps in, fixes things, but makes them a deal that they're going to have to do the right thing. So this, again, going back to the metaphysics of this, it's like, yes, there are bumps along the road. And the Israelites murmuring, it's representative of those thoughts that we have, that, doubts, all the fears and doubts that say, oh, you're never going to make it. This is not the right way. You can't do this. You were better off back in the past, back in the old way. We're seeing this, in everything from individual actions to the actions of, a large chunk of our nation today, right? That longing for the old way, because it seemed safer, at least to those folks, back then. But what that I am of us, that Lord of us, as long as we keep doing the right thing, even if we're having those doubts in the back of our mind, right? Something's going to happen. And the deal is keep doing the next right thing. Now, what the writers of Exodus thought was the right thing to do might not pass the sniff test today. Oh, well, obviously the right thing to do when we get to the promised land is kill everybody that's there. No, that even though you're saying that was the right thing to do, you're kind of justifying what you did. But the idea that we're going to do the best we can do, and that's gonna fix things one way or the other in the long term, I don't think that's such a bad thing. And here's the key: it's not necessarily living by a set of rules that somebody else had, especially like the old rules from the past. It's turning within and finding what's really the right thing. So as Bob says, in the void, our usual guidelines for living have vanished. Whatever it was before the Egypt that, where you had to keep your head down and you couldn't look up at the Egyptian masters, and all the rules that they had for us, that stuff's all gone. Every rule that they lived their lives by was gone. I think about how much life has changed, in America in my lifetime. When I was born, it was pre-civil rights era. It had been starting, but, there were still plenty of places where, it was, no blacks allowed, whites only, that kind of stuff. And, there were still a lot of places where, women couldn't do a lot of the things that, that y'all can do today, like getting credit in your own name or whatever. Though there were a lot of old rules there, they don't apply anymore. And at least we're trying to get rid of all the old rules. There are a lot of them. But what we have to listen to is what's really the right thing. It's like, what the old rule was, I don't really care. And that's one of the nice things about the void, about that period in the hallway, that after we've left the old thing behind, but we haven't found the new thing yet, is we get to really go within and ask ourselves, what's the right thing to do? And as Bob says, ultimately, that's all that we need. And I love the little saying on this meme: rules are for people who don't know what to do. And, as much as I love the spiritual experience and the community of church, I am also not blind to the fact that religion, from the early days, and certainly, the ancient Hebrews and a lot of the other religions that we saw in the axial age, are essentially social engineering. and they're basically trying to teach people not to beat each other's heads in with rocks. That's about the first, lesson in Genesis. Don't bash your brother's head in with a rock because you think he's the favorite, right? We live by morals and not ethics. What's the right thing to do? So this idea that we can really trust spirit, it gets reinforced over and over and over again throughout Exodus and throughout this story. So as Bob points out, the Israelites encounter another crisis. There's no food. The Lord intervenes, providing manna and quail. The Lord continues to guide and protect the children of Israel, often in some very unusual ways. So this is how, one of the ways that this story is made up is like, these people, they get manna, which was bread, and then they get meat in the form of quail. Have you ever tried to catch a quail with your bare hands? Okay. Today, people use shotguns, and that's really often not enough because those things take off like bats out of hell. But as far as the story is concerned, what it's telling us is that, really, when we are willing to just do the next right thing and live one day at a time. And that's if you remember in the story, it's the manna that kind of came down from the sky and was there on the ground when they got up in the morning. It was only for that day. If they tried to save some for the next day, it would have gone putrid. Except that on the day before the Sabbath, because you weren't allowed to work on the Sabbath, the day before the Sabbath, 2 days worth of manna would show up, and they could actually save, Sabbath day's manna for the next day. And it's really from that story that, we get to give us this day our daily bread. And this is kind of a basis of the idea of why hoarding wealth, especially hoarding wealth in obscene amounts, is contrary to spirit. It's saying, yeah, I don't trust. Whereas, this is an absolute lesson in trust that, God's got it and God's going to take care of us. And if we do the right thing today, tomorrow we'll be taken care of again. And I love this little quote here, a dead guy quote from C.S. Lewis. It says, relying on God has to begin all over again every day as if nothing had yet been done. And that to me is really practicing religion, really making it making it an action rather than a belief. So then this is something that happens. In 12-step, we say, this is when, somebody had a stumble or they went out again or they backslid, right? Lord calls Moses up to Mount Sinai to deliver another covenant, one that includes the 10 Commandments. While Moses is away, the people forsake the Lord and worship a golden calf. When Moses returns, he is enraged and he breaks the tablets of stone. Eventually, the people repent and new tablets are created. So, boy, does this ever happen. It's like, okay, my Moses, the part of me that's Moses, that's connected with spirit, it kind of goes off somewhere. It's on vacation and all my old stuff wants to come back. All that old stuff. And, for me personally, the thing that I struggle with is, and Laura can attest to this, is I will get angry at things. Like yesterday, I was angry at the couch that wouldn't fit through the door. And I have been angry at my computer that's not been working right, or at least not working what I think is right. And anger is not healthy for me. Anger, I grew up in a very conflicted environment. It was very violent, and it's been deeply etched into me, and It is never good for me. But in those moments that my Moses kind of goes off for a walk somewhere, there's this golden calf of anger that shows up in my consciousness, right? And it can vary for all of us depending on what it is. Some of us want to run back to the safety of something that, it could be a person, it could be a relationship, it could be a job, it could be, we kind of want to go back to the old way because, things just seem better or easier, or quite frankly, we're just used to that. People sometimes wonder, why do you keep choosing to, marry the same kind of guy over and over again? Or why do you keep choosing to live in, the same way? Why don't you get it? Well, if you remember the rest of this story, after Moses comes back down and he dog cusses them all, and he's like, okay, y'all got to pull your heads out, and now we're going to fix this thing. He takes their golden calf and he grinds the gold into powder and he makes them drink it. And the metaphysics of that is that we really have to assimilate our mistakes. We have to, drink it, really pull it in and say, okay, yeah, I got it now. I'm not unconsciously out there going back to the past. I've seen it. I know what it is. I drank it in. That's not good. I get it. I can move on now. In 12-step, we often talk about romancing a drink, and examples of that would be like, I'm going through the grocery store and I'm in the frozen pizza aisle, and right across from the frozen pizza, a lot of times is the beer, because those people market things that way. Right. And I might look, as a person who hasn't had a drink in 18 years, I might look at some new brand of beer that's got a really cool box or whatever. And it was, and to say, ooh, that looks tasty. I'm romancing that. Right. We romance things that are not good for us from our past in our minds all the time, until we fully assimilated the danger that thing is to us, And that's what they tell us in 12-step, think the thing through. It's like, okay, yeah, that looks really pretty. What happens if I drink one? Well, I don't just drink one. I drink like 12 or 18 of them. And then I'm like, okay, now I need to get some whiskey, because that's what happens next. And, then things go to hell in a handcart from there. I've assimilated that lesson. But, I'm lucky. And I'm lucky that I lived long enough to do that. But even today, we have people who are worshiping things from the past. And, I have titled the slide, "Or Maybe an Orange Jackass," not just a golden calf. But, the honest truth is that as much as our current president has been the cause of some problems, what he really is a symptom. And he's a symptom of a lot of people who have not yet drunk the ground up gold. They haven't figured out yet the toxicity and understood the damage that racism and misogyny and that the worship of the dollar have had on our society. They don't get it yet. And, we're going to keep watching them backslide until they get it. Now, for us, those of us who are, we have our internal Moses online, trying to lead us out of the desert, trying to lead us into the promised land, and then stuff's happening. And I heard from just about everybody today, right? Almost every one of us has made some steps forward, but we're experiencing some steps backward. So in the story, he says Israel's initiation took place in the wilderness, but our initiation takes place in the void. It is not an easy process. Say that again, Bob. It is not an easy process. we may struggle and regress. No, 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 no. We will struggle and regress as we vacillate between the old life and the new. I haven't met somebody that's just been able to just completely easily shake off everything old, go on to the new thing and just, I'm done, I'm good. No. This, as he says, this is a natural part of the evolutionary process. Gradually, the new life takes root. And I love this little thing. Optimist is someone who figures that taking a step backward after taking a step forward is not a disaster. It's more like a cha-cha. So we're doing that cosmic cha-cha, and hopefully we're taking a couple of steps forward before we take a step back. The thing to remember is when we take a step backward, don't kick ourselves. Now, this is really interesting, and I sometimes wonder if this isn't what we're going to need as a society right now. And I think it's sad, that there are a lot of people that may not live to see the promised land because they just don't have the eyes to see it. So in the story, the Israelites were led close to the land of Canaan. Joshua, Caleb, and others scouted the new land. Some of the spies brought back very discouraging reports. The people were fearful and murmured against Moses, and they murmured against him all the time. In anger, the Lord decreed that no one over the age of 20, except Joshua and Caleb, would live to see the promised land. They were destined to wander in the wilderness another 40 years. And of course, we understand that in the Bible, when it says 40 years, it means as long as it took, right? 40 days, 40 years, 40 whatever. So it basically means it took as long as it took. So again, if these are representing thoughts, we have some thoughts that, they can go out there and see what things are going to be like, and that things are going to be good and it's going to work. Then we have these other thoughts that are like, oh no, man, that's way too scary. That looks too hard. It can't be done. And as long as we stay in that consciousness, in that old consciousness of it's too hard, it's too scary, I can't do it, we're not going to get into the promised land. What we have to do in terms of our insides, it's like, well, Charles, does that mean, I'm never going to get there because I got to die first? No. That consciousness has to die. The thoughts in that old consciousness, have to die. And you know what? It's not necessarily a one and done process. Yeah, every once in a while in life, somebody will, wake up and have a whole new lease on life, like Eckhart Tolle, his experience of kind of breaking his consciousness. That's very rare. One of the founders of AA, Bill W., had an experience like that as he was achieving sobriety. Most of us don't. Most of us, it's, you just do the deal, and then one day you wake up and you don't really miss having a drink that day. And, it's a real quiet miracle. So the thing is it's really true in that, we have to be able to see it, but if we see it, we have a chance at becoming it, and we have a chance at living in it. And it goes back to that quote of Albert Einstein that I've got there: no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. If you're still stuck in that same level of consciousness, you can't solve the problem. You can't get to the promised land. One of the interesting things about this story is, Moses doesn't get to go there. So, and this is from Deuteronomy. After 40 years of wandering, the Israelites returned to the edge of the promised land. The old generation had died. Moses was a very old man. He blessed all the tribes and turned leadership over to Joshua. Moses died without entering the promised land. And I have on here a picture of Gandalf at the Grey Havens. And if you remember, he talked about, I was the enemy of Sauron, and my time here, my work here is finished. And, uh-oh. Well, is anybody still with me?
I'm still
I
here.
can hear you.
Yeah,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. I just had my Zoom just, it just did a weird thing and said, yeah, your Zoom died.
The only thing that's different for me is we lost your slideshow.
Oh, okay.
Same.
I will reshare it then. That's maybe just restarted everything without ending the, I'm glad it didn't end the meeting. That would have not been ideal. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. So there's Gandalf. And, the idea is that, Moses's job was to bring the old consciousness to the new. He was from that old consciousness, but he could see. He could, he was the one that had the connection to spirit. It was his duty to draw out, whereas Joshua literally means salvation, and it was Joshua's job to bring people into the promised land, which was the land of salvation. So select that. Now, one thing that's interesting is that when we're going along the way, sometimes you may think you're ready to go into the promised land, but you haven't really let go of all your stuff yet. What Bob says is, in the void, we may encounter what appears to be a new beginning before we are yet ready. If we try to force the matter, it leads only to more suffering. An old generation of consciousness must die before we're ready for the next step. And, I know that in recovery, they tell us don't make any major changes or decisions in your first year because you're not ready. And they're right, because that really is from almost everybody that goes into that process, no matter what it is you're recovering from. You're in a void of sorts. You're really doing your best to leave something old behind and to head off in a different direction. But we really need that time to allow ourselves to let go of the old stuff, because what's going to happen is if you try to go to the next thing too soon, is you're going to bring the old thing with you. It's like when we talk about having a geographical cure. I'm gonna move to someplace else, and it's always going to be better there. But then it's not. It's because I brought the old stuff with me, right? So just like this swimmer didn't wait for the pool to get full, or whatever is going on there. It's kind of what it looks like. There are times when we just need to let time take time. And that can, again, can be relationships, jobs, you name it. So finally, the solution to this is, and I thought I'd change that picture. That's not supposed to be the Missouri state flag. Anyway, the solution's given in the story, and there's two parts to this lesson. First, you got to stand firm, knowing that the I am, the Lord, will work for you, and then step forward in faith and courage. So again, Moses had kind of done his deal, and he just had to lead the Israelites out of Egypt and guide them through the wilderness and get them to the promised land. So, that was all up to Joshua, who was, represents salvation and the taking over. Actually, the name Joshua is derived from the same root as Jehovah. So what we're talking about is, the I am is not just guiding us and trying to